Today I'm introducing to you Dr. David Peacock. I often start a conversation with David which goes a bit like this, and it's from his end. I've just returned from collecting rabbit carcasses from up north. I'm about to head out to go and get some dead bones. I want to see if the Quolls virus has been there. Did you hear about the ants that eat the toad larvae to help slow the progress of the toad movements down south? So you'll never start with an interesting beginning, and the conversation always goes from there. David was born in Queensland and was raised in the Northern Territory. He began his work as a park ranger up in the Flinders, and has a great passion for wildlife and also research. In 1995-96, while he was working in South Australia's Flinders Ranges National Park, he became aware or became heavily involved in the 20-year program of Bounceback. And those of you who think you might know what goes on in the outback, I suggest if you look up Bounceback, you should be thoroughly enthralled as to what South Australia and the government has been able to do. I was very fortunate to be in the Flinders about 3 months ago, no, till alive, 5 months ago now. And to see the Flinders as I had not seen it for many a year. I remember as a child going up there and it was barren. There wasn't a tree anywhere, there wasn't any grass anywhere. You were lucky to see a roo or plenty of rabbits because that's what was eating everything. But to go up there in November and see firsthand riverbeds just absolutely covered in vegetation. Kangaroos, yes, I think they might have been almost as like conditions, literally with hills just bouncing around with their activity. But the most important thing is the regrowth and seeing what has been achieved through a 20-year program of supporting the beautiful invisible fence that's been created by Wilpena Pound and the periphery of the national parks. So please don't take it for granted, have a good look next time. David, this whole time led David to his PhD, which he completed in 2003, and it was very much his passion as in that area of looking at invasive species and how that affects the ecology that has brought him to his great passion and as a small member of the PIRSA team. Recently, David attended an international conference in Europe which was all about what is the next thing after the Quolls virus for him. We're very fortunate to have someone with his expertise with us today, and he's here to talk to you about the big spotted cat. And there are a few of you in the room who I know would remember what that really looks like. Few hands? Come on. Oh, boys, because I remember the discussions. And if you can't remember, I'm sure you'll remember by the end of the day your parents speaking about the big spotted cat. David's here to talk to you about that, and why we're going to re-establish the Western Quoll back into the Flinders Ranges, its benefits to hopefully some of the feral animals up there, and the campaign work that's about to be undertaken to get that animal, plus a few others, back into the Flinders. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Rotary, and thank you for having me here. Yeah, I'm a research scientist, so I'm probably cut from different cloth than most of the people in this room. My life is very much about trying to make my country, which I'm very proud of, a better place. And the biggest threat we have, as far as pest animals goes, is the European rabbit. You know, followed up by the red fox and the cane toad and other ones you've heard about. So I mainly work with the European rabbit pest. And as I was explaining during the lunch hour, it's been recently calculated that the two diseases that I study, rabbit haemorrhagic disease, which you know is Quolls virus, and myxomatosis, have saved our country about $70 billion since 1950 when they were both, when Pixie was introduced, and in 1995 when what we call rabbit haemorrhagic disease became established in Australia. So they're the two diseases that I mainly deal with. The problem that I'm going to talk to you about is about when we have very low density rabbits living in a national park somewhere, and what we are learning is that rabbits as few as half a rabbit a hectare, and some work we did down the Coorong, and I'll talk to you about, and say 1 rabbit per square kilometre in the up near Arkarula in the Flinders Ranges is enough to prevent a lot of our native plants regenerating. And in this era of climate change and carbon storage and all that sort of things, rabbits really get much more of a concern. So I'm going to be talking to you about these guys. These are called quolls. Your forefathers would call them native cats and hated them with a vengeance. This is a photo from down in Tasmania. And I'm going to start with, because it's a lunchtime talk, I've tried to remove all the negative photos that I normally have and be a bit more polite, because I'm a scientist and that's stuff I've got to sometimes remember who I'm talking to. Last week I went down to Tasmania to give a PhD student a hand, and I went down here to Bruny Island, and I was specifically on North Bruny Island. North Bruny Island now probably has the largest mainland being island, population of the eastern quolls left in the country. And it's this sort of the habitat. Alright, it's pastoral country, there's sheep running on this land with some woodland. This is a trap we set. We caught 2 quolls here, one on both nights, and as I like to point out, there are sheep in the background. So this is not like the Flinders Ranges National Park. This is a grazing property actually owned by the traditional owners on Murrayfield on Bruny Island, and we caught 27 quolls out of 30 traps, and quolls set off the love of the other 3. And here's a quoll, here's myself letting it go. Good fun for me as a scientist, because I work with pest animals to save these things, and this is a chance for me actually going to play with them. So here's one up in Cradle Mountain, where their numbers have declined dramatically of late. This species has, in the last 10 years, declined 50%. This is the largest one we have. It's called the spotted-tailed quoll. It was called the tiger cat in the old days. Loves chickens and loves killing possums and small animals and rodents and things like that. This is the animal that I am planning to reintroduce to South Australia. It's called the western quoll. The West Australians have an Aboriginal name for it called chooks. And in South Australia, the Aboriginal name was Ignia. And that's probably the name that we'll refer to it as. And it was in every mainland state and the Northern Territory. It is now only left in the southwestern corner of WA. And there's Jarrah Forest there, and we lost us from everywhere. And I have been spending my private time, my nights when you guys are playing golf or whatever, trying to work out why. Now, if you head out of here and you head down Fullerton Road to the top end and you know Mercedes College, you will find that this church is still there, St Michael's Church. You will find this house, Catton House, and this is the Flinders Ranges in the 1860s behind there. Here's Catton House, as it was at the time. This gentleman here in the middle is probably the gentleman who wrote an account. His name is William Catton Grasby, and he wrote that in the turn of the 20th century, he caught 27 native cats in his backyard using a box trap because they were taking the eggs under his setting hens and getting up his nose, and he wasn't worried about them anymore. As a scientist, I found that account and thought, that was amazing. 27 quolls in the backyard of what we now call Mitcham. That's a lot of quolls. And then I was made aware of this record. This is from down near Mount Gambier, a property called Glencoe. And as you can see, it's on the in 1854 here. It's pretty bare, and they've got a killing tree here which they talk about when they try and kill stock there. And they talked about in 1856 that they had a bit of a batu, a bit of a drive with 15 people and dogs, and they killed 550 quolls in a day and a night. Now 550 sort of greatly surpasses 27 in your backyard. And again, as a scientist, I began to understand that these animals used to be extremely common in the Australian environment, living under the shearing shed floor. Here's another one. This is a lady called Mrs. Henry Jones. She lived on a property called Binham, which is down near Binham in the southeast. And her neighbour killed 150 one evening. They went down to the coast, down to Carpenter's Rocks Way, and came back, and they had one of the buildings was their food store, where all the flour and the claret was stored. And she talked about opening the door and having all these eyes staring at her. And there were 150 quolls in there, which they killed, of course, which is what you would do in those days. Here's another one. This is a property called Nearpur, across the border in that area, near Apsley in Victoria in the 1860s. This gentleman, unfortunately, described as being a very ugly young man, who was very fond of killing everything, and he would set a cask, I guess like one of these up here on the wall, or perhaps a whole set, and they'll put a flip-top lid in the top of it, hang a bit of meat. The quolls would jump on the cast, the lid would flip, and they'd fall in the cast, and he'd get a cast full in the night, and of course he would murder Bruce. Another one, this is Wandodale Station, again over there in southwestern Victoria, and this is the property and the owners. And in 1850, this gentleman, William Moody, who was a pioneer of Western Victoria, one night he got about 300 which he poisoned in his garden, and then he wrote this one on for 2 or 3 years. And again, this is completely foreign to us now. This native cat, this quoll that they are dealing with, is now known to be extinct on mainland Australia. It's now that species that I showed you that I was catching in Tasmania. I have found a record up near Mount Remarkable where they talked about swarms of them in 1858. 1859, here in the middle, from Barwon Park. Now, you probably don't know Barwon Park. If you know anything about the origin of the rabbit in Australia, Barwon Park is where Thomas Austin is accredited with letting rabbits go. Rabbits were let go by lots of people in lots of places, but Thomas Austin was a man who had greatest success. And he had greatest success because he had gamekeepers, and he slaughtered everything. Eagle hawks, which is what we call wedge-tailed eagles, and quolls. In this case, killed upwards of 700 quolls in 6 weeks. And that's how he established things like pheasants and partridges and rabbits, so that the redcoats, the gentry, could have their huts and he could climb the social ladder. Also found this record, the only one from Queensland, and I don't know if you know about the plague rats that we get in Australia at times. It's a native rat that erupts up there in the Gulf country. And this guy talks about in 1897 there was a plague of the rats, and what followed then was a plague of native cats. So this is a species that used to be very abundant. What I found though is when I graphed all these things, because you can deal with a graph during your lunch hour, is that they basically drop off after 1900. Most of these black bars are in Victoria. They're basically around southeastern Australia, and they precipitously drop off around the year 1900. And I believe that was largely due to a disease which I'll talk to you about. What the Northern Territorians have done is because of the advance of the cane toad across northern Australia, what the cane toad has done, being a very poisonous little beast, it has a poison which our native animals aren't used to, a buffotoxin it's called, so he's a buffo toad from South America. So they put quolls on these 2 islands. This was where I grew up here in Adelaide. I grew up in this town of Nullarbor, a bauxite mining town. My father used to run the airport there. And they put quolls on these 2 islands. And these 2 islands, the quolls achieved massive densities. Thankfully for me, quite similar to what historically was written about in those old stories, which gives me some idea that it's actually possible for the quolls to achieve these numbers. And they did this to protect them from the cane toad. Because if you go to Kakadu now, or around Fog Dam, or now up in the Kimberleys, it's very difficult to find the northern quoll, because they just eat the young toads and they die straight away. And the guanas and a lot of our big snakes up there. What I also mentioned to you in my title was that the idea of chewing on humans, which I found quite comical, and I thought I'll entertain you during your lunch hour. I found a number of accounts, so about over 50, where people would talk about in the period with fewer a bit of a swag man, and you saw walking the streets of Victoria or some bush country, going from place to place and happened to die and lie down. Poor you, because you were just protein as far as the quolls were obviously concerned. And there are a number of accounts, and here's 3 of them, from New South Wales and Victoria, where people were found at some point afterwards, unfortunately, with bits of their body having been chewed off by the quolls. Last week on Bruny Island, one of my greatest highlights was seeing a roadkill brush-tailed possum with 6 quolls around it. And that's a huge number, and a great pleasure for me as a scientist and a lover of animals to see. And I guess they just see any dead body as potential prey. There's a number of reasons why we lost quolls, and this is one of the significant ones. This is probably one of the only photos of this in existence. If you go to Cradle Mountain, up down there in Tasmania, near Lake Sinclair, into the museum, the Wilderness Gallery, they were kind enough to take a photo of one of their exhibits. This is a quoll skin rug. These outside skins are the tiger quoll, the spotted-tailed quoll, and these middle ones are the eastern quoll. And this is a period where we didn't have polar fleeces and polyester jackets. We didn't have a real sheep industry going, and if you were in your horse and cart travelling from Launceston to Hobart or wherever it was and you needed to stay warm, this is how you stayed warm. Of course, very sad for me now, but it was a period. It's what they did to stay warm. And of course, many thousands of quolls were killed for the fur trade and went off to the London fur markets and other places. What we gathered getting to understand, as my co-author Ian Abbott, who has written this paper about Western Australia, is it looks like Australia suffered a number of disease outbreaks. Ian has written about here for Western Australia, and it looks like it was probably one of the principal reasons why we lost quolls from south-west Australia, is that we had some diseases break out. I found a number of historical records where our forebears wrote in the newspapers at the time. In this case, they talk about them in around 1882 having blue bugs. Now, blue bugs is pretty nondescript, but I suspect it probably refers to a tick. Now, whether it was an introduced tick that came in on cattle that they brought from Indonesia or South Africa on the ships or whatever, or whether it was a native tick that was carrying a disease that we brought in, it's unknown. And it would be interesting to try and work that out. We have ways now through ancient DNA. Adelaide University has one of the largest ancient DNA laboratories in the Southern Hemisphere. We now can go back with historical specimens and look for DNA of diseases and work out what killed these animals. Here's another two. This one around 1901 to 03, and the bottom down here is one of South Australia's more famous scientists, Will Jones, who reckons the disease must have gone through. And myself and my colleague Ian Abbott have now collated a large number of accounts, and we have a paper that we're about to send into a scientific journal documenting that it appears that one of the big things that knocked out our quolls was disease. Some of the accounts are quite descriptive. Like I said, the last one mentioned blue bugs. This one mentions a burrowing maggot, and we think it's a burrowing flea. And this flea is known about from the thylacine, the extinct Tasmanian tiger that you've probably all heard about, and the quolls in Tasmania. It's not known about a little bit from the mainland. This record comes from Sunbury up near Melbourne, and this is what it looks like. Like I said, it's quite well known with the quolls. It's certainly not recognised as an agent of causing animals to die off, but it is quite well described in some of these records. And this is what it looks like on a quoll. They just get these infestations on their skin, and generally it doesn't seem to be very debilitating to the quolls. It's just a host-parasite relationship we have in nature all the time. But for some reason, it looks like from some of the records that on the mainland it was a big issue and why we lost these animals. Of course, my talk is about rabbits because I hate rabbits. And if I'd like you to leave here hating rabbits, if you get the message at all, rabbits are incredibly bad for our country. We did some work down the Coorong, basically on wombats and kangaroos and things like that. And we found that young wombats starve during summer because the rabbits eat the grasses that get the wombats through. Some of the other work we did was on orchids, and we counted orchids, and we found that when the RHD, the Quolls virus, as you know, was quite active, orchid numbers increased markedly, over sixfold. They went up by their thousands. We'd go and count them in cases. There'd be like 6,000 orchids on the ground. These are incredibly palatable to rabbits. They have a very small seeding window when they come up and flower, and this is the most common one, Caladinia laufolia that we see, a beautiful little native plant. And as you can see now, the rabbits have been coming back after RHD, Quolls. We're seeing resistance in rabbits now. As was mentioned, my new project is trying to find Australia's new rabbit disease. The orchids are coming back down again. They also don't need to bite things off. When I was up in the Flinders Ranges in 2009, this is a pretty unpalatable shrub. It's called Acacia Victoriae, or Queen Victoria's wattle. The joke is Queen Victoria never realised she was being named after a prickly bloody ugly plant. But that was the joke when this plant was named after Queen Victoria. But in this case, they simply just rebark the sucker. And that's quite well known back into the 1870s and the 1860s. When the plagues went across the country, the rabbits just debarked and bit off trees and just basically destroyed our arid zone and our pastoral rangelands. So there are pastoralists now who tell me, like Michael Sheen on Little Whatnot, he wouldn't have gone through this millennium drought if it wasn't for RHD. Another guy said, you've got to give that Brian Cook like another medal. Because it literally has meant for a lot of pastoralists, they've been able to stay on the land out there. Because what we are, like some of my colleagues are looking at, is we are now seeing animals post these two good rain events we've had in 2010 and 2011 that weren't seen after the great rains of 1974. The difference, we think, is what we call Quolls virus, RHD. That we don't have the rabbits now eating off all that haystack. So the land has produced a bounty of production, and the land pastoralists are benefiting, and the kangaroos are benefiting, and the hopping mice and things are benefiting, and the benefit of that is Quolls virus. Unfortunately, no economist can put a value on that. And what does it mean to have more budgies, or more hopping mice, or more bilbies, or more kangaroos? You know, what does it mean to have less erosion? Those things aren't equated. That's 70 billion value for mixed summer Quolls. That's simply for horticulture and agriculture. If you were to put in an environmental value, which is where rabbits have the biggest impact now, you could probably double it or triple it without even trying. But unfortunately, it's very difficult to put a number. We estimate on this park, Quolls killed 3 million rabbits. So, there was like 860,000 carcasses lying on the surface, because I counted some of them. You know, 1 hectare quadrats out there. So there were carcasses lying everywhere. And so if you sort of multiply that across the country and you say one rabbit's worth $1 or whatever, you know, the Quolls just had an amazing effect on our country, and for a very small investment of dollars. And so as I said, my new job is to try and find something new. What I found historically is that what our forefathers wrote about in the papers in these records that I've got from law books all across southeastern Australia is there's lots of records where people talk about keeping quolls to kill rabbits, putting quolls back to kill rabbits. Don't put out the poison on the poison carts. When the poison carts went around to kill rabbits, they used phosphorus and cyanide, strychnine, whatever they could. They killed everything. And there are lots of records where quolls were very important and were basically talked about in killing rabbits. So my idea is when we kill foxes on things in our parks, rabbits go, thanks very much. Dave says, I think we should put another native predator back. Let's bring back the quoll. Now the West Australians have done this for the last 20 years. This is one of their more recent ones, the Flinders National Park, which is a distance north of Perth. And it's quite similar to the Flinders Ranges in that sort of aridity area. And my colleague, Brent Johnson, he's got a quoll he's measuring as some students. They've done quite well, thanks very much. And all they do is fox bait this area under what they call Western Shield, a big conservation program in Western Australia. What we plan to do is get a bunch of quolls from Western Australia where they remain, probably from the Perth Hills, put these radio collars on. That's about $300 worth that collar. If we put a satellite collar on, it's worth about $2,000. And we can then find the quolls with a Yagi antenna. We go out and they send out a signal on a certain frequency, and you dial it into your little receiver, and you go and find them, and you monitor them. And we can also monitor them through cage traps with a bit of bait in there. We know our biggest concern is feral cats. And I'm sorry if you love cats, I don't. My record shoot as a park ranger on the Flinders Park was 53 in a night. And I got tired of pulling bats and lizards and snakes and birds and galahs and things like that out of their stomachs. Okay, they are a significant problem for Australia. They carry a disease called toxoplasmosis. That disease kills our animals, and it can only survive with feral cats. Feral cats or cats, domestic cats, are what we call the definitive host. This parasite toxo can't survive without feral cats. And this photo shows you up in Queensland a feral cat being photographed with a remote camera carrying an organ quoll. And this little guy, my colleagues Al Glenn and Duncan Sutherland and others, worked out through, you know that TV show CSI? Well, this is CSI for quolls. They took some swabs of the bite marks on this little guy's neck and they ran the DNA and he came back feral cat. So we know that they're our biggest concern. Ultimately, we hope that we can manage that problem and with cage traps and things like that. And we plan to let a number of these go. Like I said, the release of Kalbarri, all they did was kill foxes, bait foxes, which is what we're doing in the Bounceback program in the Flinders Ranges. That's seen rock wallaby. If you come to visit me in 95, 96 and want to see a rock wallaby, Dave, I will take you to Breton Gorge. If I was lucky, I could show you a couple. I was through there with this guy, Brent Johnson, in preparing for this program, and we saw 73 just without even getting out of the car. That recovery of rock wallabies up there is very much to do with the Bounceback program, which is about killing foxes, killing goats, killing rabbits, and giving the wallabies something to eat, which is normally being eaten by goats and rabbits, and also stopping their young being killed by foxes. So that's what this program is about. But putting the quoll back is something that I'd like to see happen. Hopefully we can pull it off, and hopefully they can have an impact on rabbits and help us to recover our natural environment, give people something to see. And for the Adnyamunna people, the Aboriginal people of the area, this is a totemic animal for them. Very significant, especially out in the West Coast Ranges and outside Alice Springs. We're called it chilpa. So it's a very important thing for the Aboriginal people as well, to bring back one of their animals. So thank you very much.
Well done.
Thank you, David. I think we've got time for just a couple of questions.
Sure.
Thanks for the presentation, David. Two questions. One is on if we could bring back the number of quolls in those areas that you were talking about, Adelaide, as they were originally right now.
Yeah.
how would you see, without things that develop since, how would you see that equilibrium? Would that be feasible, and what impact would they have on the other species and how that moved?
Yeah.
And the second question is, you would have seen as a scientist what's been happening with this fish being washed at the moment.
Yes.
What would you like to see done about that?
Okay. I can cover the first question. The second one I have to defer to my colleague Vic Nebraskis, who's out there dealing with trying to work out what's going on out there at the moment. They think it's algae, an algal bloom, but they don't know yet. So that's the second question. The first question is returning these animals like the West Australians have done for the last 20 years. The places they're putting them back. The most recent release was Shark Bay, which is a big conservation area. They've baited, got rid of the goats, got rid of the sheep. They've killed, I think they've taken 4,000 feral cats out of the Shark Bay Peninsula now. That one little peninsula, 4,000 cats. And so we've got, they're the areas we look at. This is not going to happen in Mitcham, where Grasby had his 27 quolls. It's very difficult for us to deal with foxes in this peri-urban area because the base we have, Tenati, which is what I did my PhD on, it grows in our plants in Western Australia. It's a natural compound in Australia, so we can use it with a fair degree of safety because the native animals have grown up eating it. This quoll in WA would eat a rat that had fed on the seeds of the gastrolobium. So the rats have quite high tolerance. They might have had the Tenati, the gastrolobium in their guts, and the quoll has to survive that dose to be able to survive. So over the millennia, this quoll has quite a high tolerance to Tenati. The fox and the cat are very sensitive. It takes us 3 to 4 milligrams of Tenati to kill a fox or a cat. This guy takes a lot more. The little beton, little rufous rat kangaroo used to occur in the area, it takes 100 milligrams. Well, it's about, so it's 100 milligrams, it takes about 200 milligrams to kill the what they call the woylie. So we have this large degree margin of safety to deal with controlling that. We can only do that with safety though in big reserves. So we're looking at like the Flinders Ranges where there's 100,000 hectares. It's been fox baited to soles there in 95. It's began in 94, 92, sort of period when it sort of started. And it's what I would do 4 times a year. It's 100,000 hectares. We would also buffer zone bait the neighbours' properties. And that would give them landing benefits. They would get much higher land recruitment where they baited. And as I said, on the park now, you can see rock wallabies. You can see goannas. I saw my first goanna on the park. I saw my first echidna on the park. These are things that foxes kill. They kill everything. I pulled a echidna out of a fox stomach. How the hell they ate it, I don't know. But there were quills and whatever else. And they destroy anything and everything. So this is very much about putting quolls back like the West Australians do in significant sizes of remote reserves. This is not about necessarily doing it in the Perth Hills or the Perth suburbs or the Adelaide suburbs or something, or say Belair. It'd be great to put eastern quolls back into Belair, but we know they're going to go into people's properties nearby. That's not necessarily an issue to me, I love it, but it may concern others.
Yes, sir? Sir, you were talking about rabbits.
Yes.
I travel extensively between here and Oyen and Bendigo and Ballarat areas, and rabbits appearing all over the place. There's just millions of them around. Have we got anything on the way to perhaps knock out rabbits again? Right.
We have a number of things happening on the score of rabbits. Yes, rabbits are recovering to some degree. They're certainly not like they used to be. If you read the old stories from the 1870s, the pre-Mixo stories, where they talk about the moving in waves and stupid numbers, it's pretty hard to imagine. Even what my colleagues saw, what I saw in the Flinders in 95 before Khaleesi hit, that's why I did a PhD. That was just phenomenal for me. I was quoted in the Chicago Tribune saying it's bloody beautiful. My mum said to me, surely you didn't say bloody, don't you? I might have done, Mum, because it was bloody beautiful. Because the problem went away overnight and I saw plants regenerating. What we have on the horizon is a project with the federal government has funded called RHD Boost, and that's to go look at some other strains of the virus, and principally perhaps a strain from Korea. We only brought in one strain. There's an idea that rabbits are being suppressed through Europe through multiple strains being brought in. My other project was to find something completely different. There is a herpes virus that's killing rabbits in Alaska and Canada, which we're looking at. I'm not sure that will work out for us. But there's also, what I have discovered is that we let rabbits go at a number of locations. Rabbits have parasites and diseases. There are some parasites in southwestern WA, which we don't have over here, and they kill young rabbits. So even moving these parasites, they're called haemorrhagic or coccidia, a little internal parasite, can have some differences. But what we are hoping for is that someone in the world will report it. Mixo turned up in Uruguay in the late 19th century, we were told about it. Khaleesi turned up in China in 84, and we found out about it in Spain and brought it to Australia. So if something else like that happens, then hopefully we can benefit it. Yes, sir?
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, Tony. It's 2 o'clock.
David could talk for hours, and you just have to look very remarkable to have. David, thank you so much for today. I'm sure you all learned just a little bit more about what our ancestors had in their back gardens, and also perhaps what we missed out on. So thank you, David, for today, and all please.